Well, thank you everyone for coming tonight. It's so nice, huh, that it's light out now. Yeah, it's not even nighttime when we do these. So today is going to be fun. We're just going to talk about two powerful, simple techniques for reducing stress, and I'll review a little bit of the stress, um, some of the stress chemistry and stress mechanisms here first, and then we'll get started. We'll actually teach you a couple little things, and they're easy. They're so easy, but they're really powerful. And the key to being powerful is you got to do them. And I know it almost sounds simple, but it's like practicing scales. If you want to be a better player, right? Did you practice scales? You got to practice the scales. So these are our scales. We're going to talk about two techniques: breathing. What happened? Oh, okay. Well, I can't control my audio connection, so we'll keep moving. But thank you. Breathing and smiling. Actually, smile therapy. It's hard to believe, but we'll explain how and why it works. So again, the fight or flight response is our body's inborn, hardwired, automatic, unconscious. In other words, we don't have to think about it. When an oncoming car is approaching us, it's automatic. We don't have to worry about getting ready to jump out of the way. We jump first and we think about it later. So that's the beauty of this. It prepares our body to fight the enemy or flee from the enemy or the tiger or the oncoming car. And it's always, here's the key right here, perceived attack, threat, or harm, which means it's very hard to, how should I say this? When you're dealing with perceptions, we all know how difficult it is in even in a simple relationship where two people hear the same thing and come away with completely different perceptions, or five people see an accident and the police officers take the report and there's five different reports about what they saw. So the perception of harm becomes a very important part of how we get out of fight or flight, because we can change our own perceptions. We can do that. So you see virtually all stress-related medical, psychological, hormonal, and addictive disorders are related to an overactive fight or flight. And this figure's been bantied around for years. The old editor of the I think his name was Inglefinger or something like that, but the New England Journal of Medicine 30 years ago, I remember reading, 70 to 85% of all medical illnesses are stress related, not caused by stress alone, but made worse by stress, or stress is a component. So it's a big player in the healing equation. Now, what happens when we feel threatened? Remember this part of the brain that's going to light up right here, the brain stem right there. When we perceive threat or harm, in that brain stem, this area called the locus ceruleus, which is right, let me just find it again, right up in this area, ignites, it triggers, it releases this chemical called norepinephrine or noradrenaline, that basically ignites every cell in our body to be prepared for fight or flight. And we'll talk about exactly what it does in a minute. But simultaneously, after it ignites itself and pours out norepinephrine, it also triggers the hypothalamus, which is right in there, to initiate hormone release. And that sends ACTH to the adrenal glands. You get cortisol. And then the nerves from the brain go to the adrenal glands and pour out adrenaline or epinephrine, and that's where we get an adrenaline rush. Now, we'll talk about the different types of stress again, but a lot of people who have that sort of adrenaline junkies, we call them, they like to live on the edge. There's a certain excitement that you get from these chemicals, so it's always a delicate balance, because it does make you alert, aware, heightened sensitivity, but it's easy to cross over into burnout and cravings and always wanting to live on the edge. So now the nervous system in fight or flight, we're going to break it down today, and I don't think we talked in the last talks about the two big portions, the two major divisions of the peripheral nervous system. So obviously we have the central nervous system, which is the brain and the spinal cord. Then we have what's called the peripheral nervous system. How do we get to the rest of the body outside of the brain and the spinal cord? All the muscles in the arms and the legs. And that nervous system we call the peripheral nervous system, and it's made up of two different parts, the autonomic nervous system and then what we call the sensory somatic nervous system. So sensory and somatic just means the muscles and the sensation. So when somebody touches your arm, that's sensory somatic nervous system. But the autonomic nervous system, think of it like automatic. Autonomic really means automatic. This is the nervous system that controls the on and off switch for fight or flight. So the sympathetic nervous system is the fight or flight. When this is triggered, and this is a slide by my professor, Dr. Gant, when the sympathetic nervous system is triggered, that's the release of norepinephrine from the locus ceruleus, adrenaline. That's gear up for fight or flight. Now, how do you turn off the fight or flight? Because we don't have any control over our sympathetic nervous system. It truly works automatically in the background. But we do have control over our parasympathetic nervous system. This is what we call the opposite of the fight or flight, which is rest and digest. So this is where blood flow, remember during fight or flight, blood flow goes away from the gut out to the muscles so you can run, so your muscles are strong, you can run away from the predator or fight them, and it steals a lot of that blood from the GI tract. That's why if you're in chronic fight or flight, irritable bowel is a very common symptom because the blood doesn't get to the gut. It doesn't digest food appropriately. It takes the rest phase, the parasympathetic, to turn off fight or flight, and then blood flow is restored. So that's where you get the rest and digest. It's the brakes on the nervous system. So sympathetic nervous system turns on the fight or flight, and the parasympathetic nervous system turns the fight or flight response off. So if you look in a little more detail here, the sympathetic nervous system over here comes from these nerves in the spinal cord, and the parasympathetic comes from ones up in the brainstem and way down low in the sacrum. So the sympathetic, again, speaks only one language, red alert. Gear up for emergency, gear up for fight, gear up for flight. It responds to perceived threat. It prepares the body for fight or flight. It causes fast, shallow breathing to move more oxygen. So if you're running away, if you're breathing rapidly, this becomes a very important part of why breathing slowly triggers the opposite. So we'll talk about that. It increases muscle tension. Blood diverts away from digestion and into the muscles, so you have the strength to run or fight. And then blood also goes away from the frontal lobes. Do you remember when we talked about, you weren't here, but in overactivity of the fight or flight response, blood not only moves away from the GI tract, it also moves away from our frontal lobes. And what do our frontal lobes do? Thinking, rational thought, clear, ideas. And why does it move away from our frontal lobe? Because we don't have time to think. You've got to respond. So it goes to the limbic system, the emotional brain, which I'll go over that again here, so you'll get caught up. But it goes to the emotional brain. So just like the fight or flight steals blood from the digestive tract to the muscles, it steals blood from the frontal lobe. So people who are overloaded on fight or flight tend to make a lot of mistakes, make bad choices, recurrently bad choices, bad decisions, because their frontal lobes aren't working. Rational, cognitive thinking, the ability to just think things through. Yes? Yeah, we'll talk about it. The anxiety comes from the norepinephrine and the adrenaline. So in chronic fight or flight, the anxiety is a direct component of the norepinephrine. Now, if that stays stuck in the on position, yes, then the anxiety is coming from that, almost uniquely from that chemical, norepinephrine and epinephrine. And remember, the sympathetic nervous system turns on quickly but is incapable of turning itself off. Now, how about the parasympathetic? The parasympathetic promotes the rest and digest that relaxes the mind and body, turns off the fight or flight. It gives us the ability to unwind, appreciate beauty, and it promotes slow, regular, deep abdominal breathing. You rest. What do? We sigh. After an emergency passage, you sigh. There's a deep release and a sighing and regular deep breathing. So the key here is we can voluntarily activate our parasympathetic nervous system by proper deep breathing techniques. And I'll show you very simply how to do that here tonight. Let's take a case study. This is the book. This is a wonderful, wonderful book by Dr. Fred Luskin and Ken Peltier. Ken Peltier is kind of a pioneer in mind-body medicine. He wrote a book 30 years ago, Mind as Healer, Mind as Slayer, kind of showing how the mind can heal us or it can harm us, that it's the critical kind of linchpin in what happens to us. But he worked with Dr. Luskin here in this book, and they tested these 10 scientifically proven life skills, and they have studies on how each one of these. So I'm going to present 2 of these tonight, so we keep it simple. And then over the coming weeks, I think I'm going to go through all of them because they're so profound, and you can do them all in less than 5 minutes, 10 minutes. So we learn them very quickly, and then you have a toolbox of 10 very powerful tools to help manage stress and turn off fight or flight. This comes right from their book, a case study on Maddie, an attractive, intelligent, good-natured woman. I think she was in her mid-40s or middle-aged woman, under great strain and overwhelm, had a good sense of humor, laughed a lot, felt very tired all the time, was overwhelmed, felt something was missing from her life. And the thing that they noticed when they examined her in the clinic was she had noticeably shallow breathing. She would just breathe kind of rapidly and shallowly. So that was the clue that they said, okay, the very first thing we're going to do, and they call these life skills, these techniques, was teach her the life skill of belly breathing. And then they guided her in practicing the skill. So she came back and she did the technique over and over again till she became good at it. But literally within days, by triggering her parasympathetic nervous system, turning down the fight or flight, okay, turning off the sympathetic nervous system by turning on the parasympathetics, she became less exhausted, began to enjoy her life more, became more productive at work. It seems almost too good to be true from such a simple technique, but the key is she practiced it, she worked with it, and then there's another thing that's kind of not written in these, but I also believe that the other part of people's improvement that we don't see reflected in some of these case studies is that she was working with 2 experts in the field and a whole team at the clinic that really helped her. So there's that sense of connection. There's a sense of relief. Hey, I'm with somebody who can help me. That whole healer-patient relationship. So I think that has a big piece as well as the abdominal breathing, but they're both critical, okay? And I know it's absolutely true. That's right. That's the diaphragmatic breathing from the trumpet playing. And being able to do that probably, helped you a tremendous bit to arrive at this no aches and pains at 90 years old. Okay, so we're going to put a new life skill, trumpet playing. Clearly, you've got the right answer. I like it. I like that. So what good is slow, deep breathing? Remember, in a word, it turns on the parasympathetic nervous system, that rest and digest, which then reduces stress and strain on the mind and body, turns off the fight or flight, or at least tempers it, tones it down, like a dimmer switch, stops the overproduction of stress hormones like cortisol and the neurotransmitters like adrenaline and norepinephrine, which are related to the anxiety, and decreases muscle tension and improves mental clarity by restoring blood flow to those frontal lobes where rational thought and decision making resides. So you have access to this control switch just through your breathing or your trumpet playing, which turns off the overactive fight or flight that drives most of us to burnout eventually. So belly breathing restores a sense of control because you don't have control over sympathetic, but you do over parasympathetic. It signals also that the threat has passed. That kind of like, oh my God, it's going to be okay. We all do it naturally, you know, after an emergency. After you're done shaking, you're like, oh my gosh, what happened? I remember it was so weird. One time when I first moved to California, I was working at a hospital in Yorba Linda. I was driving back. I had just made rounds, and I was driving back to see patients in the office, and I see these guys on the side of the road with golf clubs passing a golf course, flagging someone down. So I pulled over, and I'm like, what's the matter? And they go, we need help. One of our foursome collapsed. So I jumped out of the car, grabbed my stethoscope, and I went to see him, and he was out, you know, in arrest. So I listened, you know, no air, just started the CPR, asked his buddy, do you know CPR? He started to help me, but he didn't know what he was doing. So I said, it's okay, I'll take it. And I did 8 minutes. You know, I was sitting there squatting for 8 minutes, doing the breathing, doing the compressions. The paramedics got there, and they, you know, put the paddles on him. They saw the rhythm. He was in ventricular fibrillation, which is, you know, a lethal rhythm. They were able to shock him. They put him away to the hospital, you know, talked to me a little, and then I, you know, got back in the car. And I was, you know, so fine the whole time. It was like not an issue. I got in the car, and I was like shaking like a leaf. You know, I was so calm during and then, of course, you know, you sigh and you go, oh my God, what happened? And you're exhausted, right? Because you know, basically it was pure fight or flight. You don't even know. I mean, and it's not easy being down on your knees for 8 minutes, squatting, moving back and forth. And you don't even realize you're tired until after the whole thing's done. But that's what fight or flight does, right? There was no rational thought at all. It was just pure. And I actually, it was a wonderful story in the sense that I got a call later that night. The guy was awake, alert, perfectly clear. His wife wanted to meet me. You know, I went back to the hospital the next day. I was like a hero. And I have a letter to this day, my most precious letter on the wall of my office here, that the guys in the foursome wrote me to thank me, you know, for saving his. I mean, it was the first time outside of the hospital in the field. It's like it's a completely different experience. But the point is, it's the sigh. It's when the emergency passes, then you know when the breathing gets regular, you can go back, the threat is past, and you can begin to feel rest and calmness. And remember, we studied a little bit about Herbert Benson, that first stress talk, who developed the relaxation response, which I still will teach you, but this is kind of more simple than even that. But deep breathing helps trigger that relaxation response, which is the inborn antidote to the fight or flight. Just like this breathing works, it works because it triggers the relaxation response, or sort of built in. But remember, unlike the fight or flight, which is unconscious and automatic, the relaxation response requires conscious effort. You have to sit and say, I got to take a couple breaths here. You know, you could choose to just jump into the fight or flight and stay in it and fight and get in the argument with your spouse or your neighbor or whatever, or those things like, let me count to 10, let me take a deep breath. There's a reason those, you know, we all know about that. We think it's quaint and silly, but it works, okay, if you work it. But you have to consciously make the choice to go into the relaxation response. It's not automatic. And I like that because this is, again, I told you this, my favorite saying here from the mystical works in Judaism, the Zohar. God always sends the cure before he sends the malady. So what's the cure? I mean, it's in our breath. It's unbelievable. You know, we have an antidote just in deep breathing. Remember the two types of stress. Type 1 is that sort of emergency. I got to do the CPR. A guy's down. We take care of that. We can identify it. It's identifiable. It's short-lived. It's immediate. And then it ends. And this is what gives adrenaline rush. A lot of people try and get this, but it's easy to go over the limit. Then type 2 stress is this kind of stress, the traffic jams and you don't know where it started, when it's going to end. It is not immediate. It's difficult to identify. It's long lasting. This type 2 stress makes up what we call the daily hassles of living. It's the conflicts, the toxic work, the toxic bosses, the constant worry about our kids and health and all that stuff. And it's usually unrelenting. I mean, listen, to some degree, I think you could say that the quality of our lives is directly proportional to our ability to handle these kind of unrelenting stresses in life. I don't know about you, but I had this just, I don't know where I got it. I can't blame anyone. But when I was a kid, I thought parents knew everything, right? I thought they had it all together. They're in charge. They must know what's right or wrong. And, what do they have to worry about? Life's set for them, right? Boy, now that we're here, right, we know it never arrives. That day never arrives. So whenever we experience type 2 stress in belly breathing, we have an effective tool for dealing with it, diminishing or shutting off the toxic effects of an overactive fight or flight. And we can choose a healthy response, or we can become victims of it and, deal with the subsequent burnout. So let's look at one more case study, and then I'll show you how to do the deep breath, and then we'll move on to smiling therapy. This is a Jack, 47-year-old male who was struggling with sciatica, the radiating pain down the buttock and back of the leg, following a bike accident. He had previously been perfectly healthy, never had to deal with any limitations in his life, so he took this pretty hard, got pretty grumpy, felt sorry for himself, and wasn't dealing well with it, okay? It turns out he was not a candidate for surgery, and the doctors told him, hey, there's nothing else we can do. So he ended up, and chiropractic offered only temporary relief. So he was referred to Dr. Luskin's clinic by his wife, who had heard about them, and of course, she felt he was obsessing about his back, exaggerating his pain, and this is the most important thing, he was driving her crazy. This generates most referrals in the medical world. All right, so what did they do? They taught Jack the technique for proper breathing, and they encouraged him to practice on a daily basis. So I'm going to tell you the results, and I'm going to tell you why it worked for Jack. So first, he was able to calm down his body within seconds, and you'll see when you take a couple good deep breaths and you relax your mind, it really does if you just clear your mind of worries for a moment. Put his mental and emotional worry back onto the back burner. See, because previously, and the other thing that happens is you get that Pavlovian connection. Every time it hurts, then your mind goes, oh my God, this is never going to go away. My life is ruined. Then you go through, why did this happen to me? Where, how could God do this to me? How could this happen? All those questions, then it becomes linked. So every little twitch, then it's paired with this, and, the whole thing creates a vicious cycle. So every time his back hurt, prior he had only one choice: go into obsessive worry, get stuck in his pain and stress. With access, remember we talked about the control switch from breathing that turns off type 2 stress, at least he was able to give his mind and body a break for a moment. And he had something he could draw on. That's another important thing that doesn't come through. It's something you can do. It's a tool. And if you really understand the chemistry and the anatomy of it, and you see how it works, now you have another choice. You don't just have to sit and deal with the pain, right? You can choose to do something different. And that choice alone gives hope, and that activates the healing system as well. So he not only became more relaxed and more peaceful, but as his nervous system relaxed more, he became calmer, less tired, and more optimistic. and in less pain. Now, why did it work? How exactly does the deep breathing help reduce pain? Well, it's this connection. Remember that muscle tension and tightness is an integral part of fight or flight. Because where does the tension come from? I mean, the minute that car is coming, you're ready to move. I mean, your muscles tense automatically from the norepinephrine that immediately ignites the body and all that blood flow to the muscles. So muscle tension is a major part of fight or flight. I mean, there are whole back clinics that do nothing but teach relaxation techniques to great success in reducing back pain. You know, I mean, look, we talked about the sham surgery on the knee. Do you remember that? Where the people who got the fake surgery did just as well as the people who got the actual surgery. So think about the back. The back's even much more complex than the knee. I mean, so many more things can happen in the anatomy of the back that the mind-body overlay is tremendous. So when you turn off the fight or flight, that calms down the nervous system, the flow of the nerve cell firing to the muscles, the norepinephrine that tenses the muscles, and the muscle tension and tightness can begin to decrease with regular deep breathing. That alone can take pressure off nerve roots, decrease swelling in the local areas, diminish inflammation. So the stress hormones go down as well, and that kind of helps also with the reduction of pain. And in other words, when the fight or flight was kicked off by the pain, he could now have a choice to initiate this breathing, begin turning it off, and decrease the muscle tension and the secondary pain and panic that ensued and led to this vicious cycle. And remember, let me just see here. Yeah, okay, in two things, I'll get to the thing. That this is the other reason it's so important, because stress is so personal. Remember that although the fight or flight response is identical in every one of us, two things differ from person to person. One, how quickly that fight or flight response resolves itself. Because once it's ignited, then remember, I don't know if you were here for the nutrition talk, but if you have enough SAMe, magnesium on board, and B vitamins, those things help metabolize norepinephrine. So if your system's in really good biochemical shape, you can metabolize those stress hormones much more quickly, and it resolves itself at a much faster rate. Whereas if you're already depleted, that norepinephrine forms all these toxic intermediates that really mess everything up even more. So it depends on your underlying medical problems, your genetics, physiology, and nutritional status, and also whether you know certain techniques, whether you have choices in something else you know how to do to turn off the fight or flight other than taking a pain reliever or an anti-anxiety or a muscle relaxant. And I'll show you how those work on the frontal lobes too to turn off fight or flight. So how quickly the fight or flight response resolves itself varies from person to person, and what triggers the fight or flight. Because right down here, look at this. Stress is the gap. This is the definition I made up 20 years ago between our expectations and reality. So take Jack. The reality is he never expected to be ill. He had led a charmed life. He never had to deal with any kind of disability, any pain before. So he was very dramatically confronted with a reality that did not meet his expectations of what he wanted. So that gap was big. That stress was big in him, and that really triggered his fight or flight response. And the other thing, look at stress as the balance between what you have to do and the resources you have to do it with. So you can see how personal these items are. I mean, if every other area of your life is going great, you have a lot more resources to deal with the trauma when it comes. If you've just been hit by 2 or 3 big things in a row, you're going to be much more vulnerable, right? So at any given time, stress is a very personal experience. And remember also that what triggers the fight or flight depends on our perceptions. And that's where Sapolsky, who wrote that book, Why Zebras Don't Get Ulcers, said, look, you can't put this in a pill. You're dealing with the perception of threat or harm. How do you treat stress in a pill form? You know what I mean? In a sense, because you can't, no pill changes your perceptions. I mean, there are mind-altering drugs, but you eventually go back to your original state. So remember, Bruce McEwen, one of the leading researchers and pioneers in stress, says stress begins in the brain. Only humans can become stressed out from things that exist in idea only. And that does make us, that's why zebras don't get ulcers. They deal with the stress, the tiger chases them, one of them gets caught, the others go back to lolling around and, munching on the meadow, right? And that's it. Stress is over. Any of you have a day like that? No, when do we stop worrying? That's the big question. We don't. You can't help it. That's the human condition, right? So we'll never be like zebras. Now, here's fight or flight related disorders. Let me just run through them again. Increased muscle tension that can lead to muscle tightness, back pain, that was Jack, headache, fibromyalgia, and chronic pain. Changes in breathing, shortness of breath, and hyperventilation. Increased heart rate, irregular heartbeats, and tachycardia. Remember, decreased blood flow to the prefrontal cortex and elevated levels of norepinephrine and epi can lead to lack of focus, anxiety, racing thoughts, and depression, poor decision-making ability, lots of mistakes. Shunting of blood away from the digestive tract can lead to IBS, diarrhea, heartburn, GERD. Increased inflammation in the coronary arteries can lead to heart disease, and a weakened immune system can lead to more colds, flus, and bronchitis. So here's the guys. This is Dr. Luska and this is Dr. Peltier. And here's a quote directly from their book, Stress Free for Good. Learning to breathe fully and deeply may be the single greatest gift you can give your body and your mind. I mean, that's a pretty dramatic statement from two guys. I mean, listen, these guys could sit here and give a lecture from now until the end of the year on the dynamics of the physiology and the biochemistry of the stress response. I mean, and especially Peltier spent his life studying this. So to get a guy with that much understanding of the intricacies of the system to stand behind a statement this simple is pretty remarkable, don't you think? So let's learn how to do it. Very simple. I always say, I think the best way, and you can do it right there from your chair, you want to put one hand, you just kind of sit up comfortably. You want to put one hand on your chest and one hand on your belly. Now, the way that I do it is I recommend first that you just, as you take a deep breath in, you can just kind of watch me first. Your belly's going to go out. You're going to imagine that there's a balloon in here. And as I breathe in, my belly pushes out, and then with the breath I have left, I'll expand my chest. So watch me here, and you'll see. And then you let both balloons just go down. Okay, but first the belly goes out. And a lot of people make the mistake of kind of sucking it in on the in-breath. But the actual, as the diaphragm pushes down, it pushes the belly contents out. So that's the key to belly breathing, is the first part of the breath. And even if you don't do the chest, which I think is helpful, just getting the belly right. So when you take the breath in, and then I kind of like to pay attention. So as you practice this for a few times, I'll be quiet here in a minute, just kind of focus on, there's a little place that at the end of your in-breath, when you're done breathing in, but you haven't started breathing out yet. It's like a little pause. It's like a pause button. And that really, when we do meditations and deeper visualizations, I bring that up a lot, because if you can focus on that little place between the end of the in-breath, when you're done inhaling and before you start exhaling, it just lasts a second, but you're kind of almost suspended in this place, this in-between place. And that's really the place of calm and relaxation and rest. So just practice a few times just so you can get the feel for it. And then I'll tell you some other ways that exist. But just as you breathe in, feel your belly go out. And then if you have any breath left, raise the chest and the shoulders go up a little, and you don't have to hold it, and then just let it out. And you let it both out at the same time. You don't have to let it out in reverse order. You just kind of in with your breath, belly expand. Focus for a second on that kind of suspended place between the in-breath and the out-breath, and then just let your breath out. And just go ahead and practice a few more times at your own pace. And you keep your belly soft as you do that. You don't want to tense up your belly. Just feel it go soft. And as you do it more and more, you kind of find that nice place where the breath just slowly goes in, and then you kind of float at that point before you exhale, and then just let the air out. And with the air going out, you just let kind of all the stress and worry go out too. So the simple techniques that you can add to it are, as you're breathing in, just imagine kind of calmness going in. And this is where visualization would come in. Some people imagine their favorite color, or just a peaceful feeling, or even the scent. I love doing this deep breathing, smelling a rose. I'll just pass by a garden and I'll go, and I just, that smell of a fresh rose, just, I imagine that as filling me up with calmness, and then you just let the breath out. So you can literally do this in one breath. In 10 seconds, you can down-regulate that fight or flight response. Now, of course, you practice during times like this when it's calm, not when they're drilling the floor next door. And then it's much easier to draw on this when you need it. It's a lot harder in the midst of the argument, or in the midst of the perceived, attack on your character, or whatever it is we've been threatened with, to draw on this. But you learn, and if you can just take a couple deep breaths like this and stop yourself. Remember, it's not automatic. The fight part's the automatic. Pulling away from the fight and doing this is the non-automatic part. So that's pretty much it. Any questions about the breathing? Go in. Absolutely. I would say within 10 minutes you go home and you practice this for 5 minutes, as long as you know the belly should go out, because most people do. The tendency is, I'm pulling, yeah. Yeah, okay, it's a good point. Yeah, at first it may not, but very shortly, it won't take you any time. Just practice it a couple times and it'll start to go out. You'll focus on, you can even push your belly out. It might be hard at first because you think, if I'm pushing my belly out, I can't take a breath in. But really, if you just take the breath in and relax your belly, the way the diaphragm works, because it's a dome-shaped muscle. So when you contract the diaphragm, the dome pushes down. And when it pushes down, it's pushing all the contents of your belly out. And in fact, this idea that you pull it in is part of the fight or flight. It's part of the hypoventilation, the stress response that you don't even know you're doing. It's kind of like muscle guarding. It's unconscious. But that will change. That's a big part of it. Yes. Beautiful. That's a very great idea. Sometimes doing this lying down is easier, because then you can't manipulate the process. Yeah, that's a great idea. So if you're having trouble with that, lie down on the comfortable floor and practice that way. Put one hand on your chest, one hand on your belly, and as you breathe in, your belly will come out. Yes, and that's the key, not having to think about it. then we still have to consciously choose it, but once we choose it, we know how to do it, and we can quickly do it. Now, the next part of the talk is very simple. Will be done in probably 10 minutes, but I want to go through this because you have all the background. The power of smiling. It's not just smiling, although in the book they talk about I don't know if it was a monastery or some kind of religious group that brought people in that was just using this smile therapy. They insisted that everybody, no matter what they're you know, smile. The smile, you know, and even if you plaster it on, you know, a sincere smile's better. But even if you plaster, they were getting incredible results. And this is why, because what Dr. Paul Ekman at UCSF found is that smiling registers in the hypothalamus, that part of the brain where endorphins, pain-relieving chemicals, kind of your natural high, the runner's high, right? Endorphins are produced in enkephalin and those sort of morphine-like compounds, and hormones are regulated. Now, what he found out is that smiling actually stimulates the production of endorphins. So smiling and what endorphins do, and I'll explain here in a minute. If you remember, I don't know if you remember this slide from Dr. Gant, but this is the locus. Here's the brainstem. Here's like where the eyeball would be. Okay, this is facing forward. This is the back of your head. This is the cerebellum, your balance center. Here's the brainstem. So here's the locus ceruleus where noradrenaline or norepinephrine ignites the fight or flight. And then here's your prefrontal cortex right in here, part of the frontal lobes, and the cerebral cortex where rational thought occurs. Well, these frontal lobes are the critical player. So fight or flight is initiated down here in the brainstem and the hypothalamus, but the frontal lobes up here are the great modulator of fight or flight. And it comes from this area of the brain actually feeds back to turn off the locus ceruleus and turn down the release of norepinephrine. And this is how connecting to a higher purpose reduces stress. So right here, this picture is reversed. So here's the eye and the front of the brain. Here's the back. But here's the brainstem. This is the reptilian brain. Remember, this is our automatic compulsions like breathing, respiratory rate, sweating. These are automatic things you don't think about. And then you've got over here what we call, this is the emotional brain, the amygdala, the thalamus. This is what we call the emotional brain. So this is the reptilian brain. Here's the emotional brain. And this is where blood flows to during fight or flight. It goes away from what we call here the monkey mind or the thinking brain and the frontal lobes where our higher purpose exists. This is a cute little thing, your higher porpoise. You know, a little humor always helps calm down the fight or flight response. That's Dr. Gant. He's got a sense of humor. So this is your higher porpoise. And remember the drunk monkey. Why do we call this part of the brain the drunk monkey? Our thinking brain. Because this is where, although it's wonderful when rational thought is engaged and we're thinking clearly, it's also the part of the mind that doesn't let go of things. It jumps from one branch to another like a monkey, one worry to another. We call it the monkey mind. You just imagine a monkey jumping from this branch to that branch, you know, hooting all over. And that's what our mind does with worry. And that's why that's the part of the brain. We can use that to calm down the fight or flight, but you have to train the monkey mind, okay? And the higher purpose, these frontal lobes. Now, this is the interesting thing. I want to go back here. One of the great modulators of fight or flight is endorphins and pain and any pain-killing substance, morphine, Vicodin. The reason these things are so addictive is because they feed back. They probably generate signals within the frontal lobe. I'm not exactly 100% sure of the mechanism of endorphins, but they probably trigger activity in these frontal lobes, which we can also trigger with many other ways, like connecting to our spirituality, our higher sense of connection or purpose in life, but also drugs trigger it. And they can trigger a response here that feeds back to turn off fight or flight. So one of the beauties and one of the reasons that people get so easily addicted to pain medicines, for a lot of people, it just completely turns off their fight or flight. They're suddenly out of stress. You know what I mean? It turns off that sympathetic overdrive. So this is where smiling triggers the production. What do we say? It registers in the hypothalamus, so that's right over here. So it registers in this hypothalamus right in here, and activity in here can then feed back and turn off this fight or flight. So smiling registers activity here that reduces that, as does compassion, as does empathy, a sense of connection, spirituality, higher purpose. All these things are part of that frontal lobe activity that, where'd that go? That related here that turns off this activity, okay? And you think about it, when we're animal-like, you know, there are many religions, like my religion, the Jewish religion, teaches we have an animal soul and we have a human soul, a higher spiritual soul. And the animal soul kind of leads us to do bad things, to fulfill our, you know, basic drives and impulses at the expense of anybody else. And the human soul works from this part. This is where our higher spirituality is, our frontal lobes and our thinking brain. So with a higher sense of spirituality, we can turn off some of those, you know, more selfish, you know, narcissistic impulses that we all have within us. And this is where you get, it all ties in. So you see that smiling triggers, it's an expression of contentment and joy. And contentment and joy are really highly related to a sense of connection, a sense of, you know, that where there's something bigger than us that we're connected to, whether it's love or nature or community or a spouse or a friend or whatever. So that sense of connection stimulates our frontal lobes. So the smiling, the endorphins then stimulate the frontal lobes, and the smile triggers that frontal lobe, not only through the chemical endorphins, but also because it's a sign of contentment and joy. And that's a frontal lobe activity. That's a calm. We don't feel joy in the midst of an emergency, right? In the midst of an oncoming vehicle approaching us at high speeds, nobody feels a sense of calm and joy. So the smile is a completely different area of the brain, and that's where some of its power comes from. So there are two things I think that are at work here when they talk about reminding your face to smile equals less stress. I love this picture. That's great. And I think, look, we all look to the young, the baby. I mean, who has a more natural, innocent smile? Not that they don't have a dark side, these little ones, you know. They're mischievous at best, but they do have a very natural, innocent smile that comes from an incredibly wonderful place. And if we connect with that, so one of the things that they do in their clinic, here's the technique. And I'll go over it more in a few minutes, but if you shut your eyes and imagine that you're in a place where you have this sense of joy and contentment. So do that by imagining you're as loved as you wish to be and that you're as loving as you can be. And then as you visualize this wonderful feeling of giving and getting the love that you want or deserve, or imagine your child when they were young and innocent and not a teenager and all those wonderful times. Imagine that moment or a happy moment in your life, and then bring a smile to your face. And what you're actually doing, just like Pavlov, ring the bell, put out the food, eventually the dog salivates because he sees the food and he hears the bell, then they ring the bell, they don't give him the food, and the dog still salivates, right? Well, if we can anchor this smile to a wonderful thought or a feeling or something we remember that was peaceful and calm in our lives, then that smile becomes an anchor for a very calming experience. Even though it naturally is kind of that, what we're saying is let's strengthen that anchoring, let's strengthen that connection, and that will bring about a sense of joy and contentment. So smiling as you remember the feelings of love and care, and here's the key that they use, that underlie the daily stress you experience. In other words, the key to making this technique work, the smiling, because it's not just smiling, remember, it's smiling because you care, is to say, okay, what are all the things I've done for somebody today that caused me stress? Okay? Whether it's, driving our kids here. Look, we drive them. Let's say I'm driving Ariana to gymnastics. Well, it's stressful. I have to go pick her. I have to get there on time. I have to worry about the traffic. I have to deal with this. Sometimes I say, can't we just go home? And, but I'm doing all those things because I love her and I care, and she gets a lot of joy out of it. So what they're saying is take the stresses we experience that exhaust us and try and remember the love that's behind them, the connection, the sense of joy, the picture on her face when you get, instead of just letting the stress overwhelm us, let's choose to remember what drives us to do so many of these things that put a drain on our body. And when we do that, then anchor it to a smile. So in other words, it's easy for us to remember the stressful things and to focus on them, but we want to focus on the good feelings of love and caring and nurturing that drive us to do these things, and then anchor those good feelings with the physical act of smiling. And then that strengthens the frontal lobe activity, helping to turn off the fight or flight. So again, and this is one thing that Herbert Benson, when we talk about the placebo response, he actually wanted to rename, in his book Timeless Healing, he wanted to rename the placebo response Remembered Wellness, because he felt that a lot of the benefit of the placebo response came from somehow triggering a time when we felt happy or healthy or safe, that this remembering a good time could induce powerful healing effects in the body. Now, I never agree. I liked how he did that. I thought that was fascinating. I think there's more to the placebo response than just remembered wellness, because I took that to another level with him, and I wish I had a chance to dialogue with him more. But I said, look, that's one part of it. You can go to the past and remember something that was, but you can also experience spontaneous wellness. It's not just remembered. You can, in this moment, think of something that's good, or enjoy a piece of music, and that can bring you a sense of wellness in the moment, right? Enjoying a beautiful concert, or a piano concerto, or yeah. And then I also said, well, you can also do it in the future. You can imagine things that haven't happened yet, and that's where the whole area of guided imagery happens. So not only can you remember wonderful times from the past, you can experience them in the now moment, spontaneous wellness, not just remembered wellness, and then what I call anticipated wellness. That's the guided visualization. So let's think of, we do this all the time when we plan a vacation. How many of us spend a lot of time planning a vacation and get so much joy from it just in the planning, and then the thinking about it, and then the talking about, and the excitement? So we can use all these things to trigger a healing effect in us, So, but clearly, remembering things or times or the goodness behind what we do, and then smiling and anchoring it with a smile is a great way to pair this response and anchor it. And then So there is relaxation in remembered wellness. It does reduce our stress. And here, this just summarized what I just said. Smiling as we remember how much care and kindness are behind the daily hassles and stresses we experience in caring for our loved ones helps to change our chemistry through remembered wellness. And then I've been teaching this for years. We live in parallel worlds. So this is our challenge in the midst of stresses that just, are unrelenting in real life, right? Is we live in these parallel worlds. And what do I mean by that? There's always stressful things to focus on, and there are simultaneously wonderful things happening in our lives and our world that we can focus on. We have to choose which one. So we have to choose to focus on the good things and the kindness that motivates our actions, not just the bad things. And again, just like the fight or flight is automatic and the relaxation response, we need to consciously evoke it. Unfortunately, I think this is the same in this parallel worlds. We naturally kind of gravitate to focus on the things that are wrong with our lives. And it's important to know what's wrong. I mean, we can't improve if we didn't do that. But then once we know what's wrong, we can't guilt ourselves and shoot ourselves to death. Then we need to focus on, well, how do I just improve? And then look at the things that are good in our lives. So I think that's a constant lesson we all need to learn. And that kind of brings us this, that honoring the good you do helps relieve stress. And this is what I was talking about. We're good at talking about what's wrong. We need to become equally good at talking about what's right in our lives. And then this brings us to the whole subject of gratitude, which may be the single most important, quality we can nurture in our lives to live a happy life. I mean, I don't know what else is more important. People who just don't have a good ability to be grateful, or they haven't developed the gratitude muscle or whatever you want to call it, or the skill of gratitude, are miserable. Or they don't know how to give away enough to make somebody else happy. Yeah, they're so focused on their own misery that they miss the joy in. Listen, and that isn't that the truth? I mean, most of our joy in life, I mean, if you think about it, comes from doing things for other people, not for ourselves. I mean, that's a great point. I didn't really think about it, but it's true. Absolutely. Great, Jeanette. So, that's and again, that's the technique, connecting with the love and care that underlie and motivate our daily work. And then again, a sense of connection, that tuning into our own ability to love and care for others and anchoring that feeling with a smile buffers us against the inevitable burnout that occurs from a fight or flight response that's stuck in overdrive. And I've always had a sense of connection, and this is whether it's to another person. There's lots of books written on the healing power of doing good for others or helping others, volunteer work. All those things are amazingly healing. But that sense of connection also to others, to our own inner goodness, to God, to spirituality, to whatever that connection is, and even the physical connection, the touch. In my past seminars, I've talked about the healing power of touch. And you look at massage and body work and chiropractic. A lot of the healing that happens in that may or may not be to do the cracking of the bones or not, but it's certainly from the physical touch, from just being touched and knowing that somebody has touched you and is working on you and is helping you. So a lot of these things all tie in, but a sense of connection is vital for stress reduction. So here's the final slide. And to do this life skill, you've already done the most important part, which is how to take a few deep breaths. So we first start with a few deep breaths, and then think of something you did today that was stressful or exhausting or depleted you, like rushing to get to this talk or whatever it is. Listen, it's a lot easier to sit at home and, not try and make it out. And I appreciate everybody coming out here. But everything, even things that have a good ultimate outcome, take effort and stress. And so you think about, and then you ask yourself, well, why did I do these things. And then you connect to what it was, the deeper purpose, the stronger underlying connection to do good that was behind your actions. And then when you connected to that, when you take a moment, close your eyes, and you feel that sense of, oh, I'm glad. And even for me, look, it's stressful to do these talks sometimes, but every time at the end, I feel so great that I've done them. You know, it's because I love it. I love the ability to, you know, see everyone here after, away from the workplace, and talk about these things, because I learn so much from everyone too, and that gives me a great sense of joy, right? So think about the things that you've done. Close your eyes, take a few deep breaths to turn off the fight or flight so your mind's clear. And then when you get that sense of, wow, I really learned something special tonight, or I was with people I really care about, then just, you know, put a smile on your face. Let's just do it. Yes. In 1 second. And you just hold the smile for about 10 or 15 seconds if you can. Not easy at first. And then appreciate all the good deeds you've done, the caring thoughts you put forth in attempt to help yourself and others. And then think about how much you care about those you do things for, and let the warmth of that experience fill you up. And that's it. It's a simple Pavlovian thing. We can do it all the time. You just focus on the smile a little more. We all have these moments, and we all do it. But again, bringing your conscious attention to them in that moment, and especially, you know, this is the kind of thing at the end of the day, along with a little gratitude thing, you can just, even if you're writing in a journal, just as you're writing and thinking, yeah, you know, just focus on that smile, because it triggers those endorphins and whatnot. Yes. Mm, I don't think you want a zinger. It's no. I think it's the. It's just the slight movement of the muscles, just like a baby would smile. You know, maybe just a little, just enough. Yeah, to create the feeling. I've even heard it. I even heard one funny thing. I don't know if I read it in the book or not, but they said when you wipe your face, I don't know where I read this, on the towel, you know, you wash your face. Most of us wipe our face down. They said, wipe your face up so you get a smile out of it. Yeah, go up. No, somebody said that. I don't know. Wow. In Eat, Pray, Love, one of the meditations was just to smile. No, I hadn't read. I had never read the book, but that's wonderful. Maybe that's what they were referring to, where some of the smile therapy happens. But but I think the deep breathing, just being aware of these things, that we have some conscious control over that fight or flight. You know, more than just popping a pill or taking a, you know, I mean, look, the nutritional end is helpful, but nothing alone does it. This is a lifelong effort, as we know, to manage stress in a way that we live a fulfilling life without crossing over into burnout, or being so, you know, listen, I know a couple people, they're few and far between, that are not stressed enough, if you know what I mean. They're just a little too happy living off everybody else. So their solution is my problem. You know, that doesn't work either. So remember that Yerkes-Dodson curve, there's a point at which stress is optimal. Too little's no good, too much is no good. So yes, Jeanette. Yes. Yes. Yes, and you know you're right because look, we teach the little ones to say thank you when somebody does something nice for them, right? But we ought to teach ourselves to acknowledge our own goodness, and you know, because it does come from that place, and you know, it's critically important. I know we take it for granted, but there's an old Jewish thought that says that the balance between good and evil in the world uh, is exactly equal. I don't know if it was Maimonides who said this to one of his students, and he said, "You have to live your life as if the balance between good and evil is absolutely even, and which way it goes depends on your next deed." You know, that your simple choice to do one simple kind act could change the balance of the world for good, you know? And it's a wonderful way to think about things sometimes. There are people like that. Yes. Yes. Wow. He would put it. Yes. See? Yeah. Wow. Wow. So yeah. That's wonderful. I'll just repeat it because nobody out there can hear. But Jeanette's saying that when she was young and becoming a professional in the orchestra, the conductor would come to her before and give her a big hug and say, "Hey, we're on. It's going to be okay." Basically, just a reassuring, "Let's go." And she never forgot it. That's a beautiful thing. You can't help but smile when you think about it. Yeah. Yes. Wow. That is. That's right. I know you do. So any other questions? All right, so we'll see you next month. We'll take a few more of these techniques and run through them. And is this okay? Are you enjoying this, or it's too? Should we go back to? We're okay. Oh yeah, stress free for good. Um, and here's the best picture: Stress free for good by Dr. Luskin and Dr. Peltier. Excellent, excellent book. I actually did learn hypnosis and I used it early on in my residency. I don't think I was very good at it. but but it's a very powerful technique for people, you know, for people who are good at it. Um, yeah, yeah, I think right. The problem for most of us is waking up, not not falling asleep at night. No, no, but obviously and it is a great way to get, look, we haven't even dealt with the whole idea of conscious and unconscious mind and the psychology behind that. That's going to be where the real big breakthroughs occur scientifically in the next century. I mean, I think because look, and there may not be breakthroughs. Listen, it may be the human condition that, you know, I'm very skeptical. There are a lot of techniques out there that claim to directly sort of access these energy centers and the unconscious mind so you can have rapid change. And, you know, maybe it's my religious background and I kind of, I know that, you know, life is difficult and it's a constant effort to improve ourselves. That's our life's work. So I'm kind of skeptical of some of these changes, but I think we will find certain things that can really help people to break through some blockages. But I think, listen, it's always going to be a struggle. I think it's the human condition where you know, we struggle to be better and to improve ourselves and to, correct our character flaws, which we all have, and, do good. Well, anyway, thank you all for coming out. We'll see you next month, and thank you. Oh, great. I'm glad. Thank you. Hey, it looks like it didn't record. No, I don't know. On and off, your audio stuff would say it's off, and then it would say trying to reconnect, and then it would come back on. Because normally when I go here, it says stop recording. So that doesn't matter. I'll record it. Yeah, but you were good. What's that? You were good. Yeah. Hey, that's right. I don't. I probably have to record all these anyway in short form for the internet. Got to do them in smaller doses for So okay. Yeah. All right.